Well, hello and welcome to Insight with Political Tours, the travel company led by reporters around the world. The headlines were alarming last Friday. Serbian president deploys troops to the boundary of Kosovo. Meanwhile, Kosovo's ethnic Albanian government was deploying heavily armed police to Serb-dominated areas in the north of the country. Here we are, over 20 years after the conflict ended in the region, and the spectre of armed conflict resumes once again, or perhaps not. We'll take a look at that in a second. But the key question remains, why is the region so apparently unstable? To answer that question, we are going to take a look at our Balkan tour. We have one of Kosovo's most famous broadcasters, Jeta Xhara. Hello and welcome, Jeta.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us. I'm very much looking forward to this. Sorry everyone for the slight delay to the start of this, but here we are. We're doing very well. I want to take a different approach to this. I don't want to talk about the politics of what's happening now straight away, because I think we need a bit of a refresher as to where we are with Kosovo. And what I want to do is actually talk a bit about you and talk a bit about the past 20 years, really, because I think many people tuning in, many people watching will have forgotten a lot of it. Jeta, I've known you for about 20 years, but before that, can we go back even before that? Where did you grow up? You were born at the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s?
So I'm born in 1978 in a time where Kosovo was a part of Yugoslavia, and I was born in Skopje because it's just 1 hour away from Pristina. You could go to and choose different hospitals if you wanted to give birth. It was one country. Went to school here, was part of pioneers, Tito's pioneers, until in primary school, last year of primary school, 1989, when Milosevic came to power, my last year of primary school, we were kicked out of school because the Milosevic regime decided that took the Kosovo's autonomy away. Kosovo was part of a province of former Yugoslavia, an autonomous province. Milosevic decided that from now on, Kosovo is going to be purely part of Serbia, not an autonomous province, and all the curricula in our schools became a Serbian curricula, which means that we needed to learn according to only the Serbian program. Kosovo Albanians, which make 90% of the population in Kosovo, decided they were not going to hold their schools according to Serbian.
Okay, so this is part of a major sort of, what I want to do is sort of go back over these events, and that was a very sort of tumultuous period, but it was before the conflict broke out in Croatia and Bosnia, and so the Kosovo Albanians were expelled essentially from institutions. So that's your schooling process, but people who were in factories also lost their jobs. What were your parents doing at that time?
So both my parents were civil servants. One of them lost their job. My mother was working as a civil servant in what was then a Committee for Education, an equivalent to Ministry of Education now. Dad was working in a legal department of the only bank that existed, and later became Ljubljanska banka. Yeah. My mom was kicked out of work at the same time as I was kicked out of school, and we started to educate ourselves. Kosovo Albanian all started to be educated in the parallel system, which meant going to school in home schools. And that was a major event because up to then, the Kosovo was having its first university. Women were getting educated and finally getting jobs, and it was a big deal for women to be in jobs. And suddenly, like, I think one of the biggest traumas of Milosevic era was not necessarily killing, but the fact that Milosevic made my mother a housewife, and that was something that her parents had fought against. Generations of people who had fought illiteracy in Kosovo and education of women made sure that women are going to have jobs, and suddenly that was regress.
Okay. And at the same time, you've got this big split. So then Serbs are still employed within institutions and factories, and the Albanians are out of it. So you've got this exclusion of the majority Albanian population from the state that is Serb dominated. At the same time, the war is going on in Bosnia. What were you aware of as a child? I mean, you're talking about you were 9, 10, 11 when the war broke out there in Bosnia. And what were your parents saying? What was the sort of the mood in your household?
The mood in the household was that this is an apartheid system. Our neighbors, Serbs, were getting salaries in the end of each month. And for example, my Serbian friends in the neighborhood were getting treats because in the end of the month, their parents were getting salaries. Suddenly ours weren't getting the salaries. And in a sense that you could see evidently this, we are secondhand citizens. The center and institutions became purely inhabited by Serbs, and Albanians started to, even, people who were professors started to sell groceries or open a little business to mend clothes. My parents put me in a sewing course. They said, well, now we see the fact that we're just kicked out and we have no other skill means we can't earn. So we better have an extra skill because we're always going to be secondhand citizens. That was the idea, that we're going to continue in this era where war in Bosnia is happening and people are getting killed. We should be, this regime is not yet killing us, but certainly it's influencing our livelihoods and our education. So we were again up against the wall, and politically, our parents just continued to repeat the fact that Kosovo was not militarily strong. It never had its own army or police, and we would be, if we were going to go to war, we could be completely ethnically cleansed. That was a clear idea in my family, even in '89. And when the war started, we had relatives in Bosnia. They were calling us, telling us they've got no water, they've got no heating, they've got cold winters. Sarajevo is under siege, and we almost felt lucky we're not being killed.
Yeah. The war comes to an end in Bosnia in '95, a terrible war too, 3.5 years of Sarajevo being under siege for all that time. And obviously that was the conflict came to an end there, but that sense of uncertainty didn't leave Kosovo at all. You were about 16 at the time, I guess?
Yes, I was about 16. And for a long time, the civil resistance movement tried to somehow keep the morale going. Diaspora was contributing to keep this a decade-long system of homeschooling alive. People organized a parallel medical system, parallel education system, parallel tax system, in order for to wait for the moment where Kosovo Albanians felt that the West would take attention to Kosovo.
You were 16. What did you know you wanted to be a journalist at the time? As a potential journalist, it's an incredibly exciting time and risky time, but you were young still.
I knew that I want to be involved in fighting the injustice that was happening to my family, to myself, and it was just I decided to study drama and writing, and it became I signed up for my university at '96 when drama writing would be the first time opened in this parallel university. And I thought immediately that with all this drama going on around me, I found it a bit ridiculous to do literature and to write fiction. So immediately I started writing for school newspapers, local newspaper. We issued a newspaper as part of Coaditore that was a youth supplement called Post Pessimists. And the moment that in '97, when the first international journalists started coming over from Bosnia to Kosovo And when KLA was doing its first actions and police started actually doing certain military actions in villages, burning villages, or massacres were happening in these villages after the KLA would do hit and run attacks, Kosovo Liberation Army. International attention got suddenly not the peaceful movement. What I saw there was not the peaceful movement, but actually a violent resistance of Kosovars was bringing the attention of international media, and they wanted someone who spoke English. And I was 19, just 19, when I started working as a translator for the BBC in the end of 97.
In 97, wow, okay. And that's a pretty hair-raising job. I mean, that puts you in the thick of things. Obviously, in the cities, relatively unscathed, places like Pristina, perhaps less extent Mitrovica, you wouldn't see the conflict. But if you went out into the valleys, if you went out into the plains, you went into the villages, it was a very different story.
Not only that, the level of poverty I saw in the villages, it made me feel privileged. That's when I understood that Kosovo had in fact been the least invested region of former Yugoslavia. Even sewage and water was not installed in these villages. My house was full of books. When I entered the houses in the villages, they had just a heat, a stove, some tea, and cushions to sit and sleep on. So I understood there's quite a difference of how they were experiencing conflict for a long time. They were not invested in, and these were the people who in different phases of former Yugoslavia had gone to Germany to work because they had no working opportunities. And this was the heartland of where the guerrillas started initially to come out and in small formation, quite amateurish, but nevertheless they would not accept the civic resistance that was so tolerable up to then. In the city.
Okay, we're rushing through all of this, but I do want, the reason why I'm going through all of this, because all of this has ramifications for later. Even that division between the people in the countryside, the Kantanar and the Qytetar, the people who are the city dwellers, and there's a massive social transformation in Kosovo after the war. That's part of it. The 97, 98, 99, it gradually becomes more and more bloody. There are more and more repressive measures. The KLA becomes more and more assertive. And eventually you get, I mean, there are some major massacres that take place in villages, and we won't go through all of them, but that essentially prompts NATO to intervene in March 1999. That period of time there is probably the most tumultuous in all of people for anybody living in Kosovo. Where were you then when that happened? And can you describe what happened to you or your family, or to those of your friends who you're with as well?
Yeah, so first day, let's say one of the first times that I witnessed a large massacre was the famous Prekaz massacre and Prekaz battle that went on in the Yashari compound. So this was a compound not far from Pristina, where I live, where the guerrillas decided that they're going to stay inside their homes and defend their house. Basically, the police would come in, and they were warned that police just wanted to arrest these guerrillas. Guerrillas decided, Adem Yashari with his brothers and 50 members of his family decided they're going to fight them through. But this is, I think it's epic. It's an epic battle, which I witnessed as a journalist. It's epic because what it means today is become a pilgrimage. That place where the police went in and the majority of over 50 people killed were women and children. Is something that has in Kosovar imagination, be those from the city or from the village or from abroad, because 500,000 Kosovars live abroad now. It's become a pilgrimage of a sort that deserves attention. Basically, the Serbs went in and with a huge with tanks. Even later, we found out these were the tanks that the Serbs had stolen from the Dutch compound of NATO in Bosnia. So with these tanks, the Dutch tanks had driven from Bosnia to Kosovo to run down and kill people. I remember the next day. It's just peculiar that because the police invited us, the BBC crew, to see the terrorists that they had killed. They lined up the bodies, and majority, to my surprise, I couldn't believe that somebody would do such an anti-PR to itself, because majority of bodies were women and children. And the police, Serbian police that had done the action the day after was proud of it and was showing the bodies as the result of an anti-terrorist attack. This is how Albanians were portrayed, and the delusion that Serbia had by that time, 10 years after the war, filled its head that even if you kill women and children in a village, they saw it as ousting terrorism out of these villages. So
there were other incidents where, I mean, I think Prekaz and the Yasharis is a symbol of Albanians trying to stand up for themselves. But there were many other cases where people were massacred in villages where there was no armed conflict. There were no armed members of the KLA. Famously, I'm trying to remember where all the men were wiped out.
That was the village of Krusha in Prizren. All the men in the villages were wiped out.
So, but there's so much to talk about. In March 1999, NATO intervenes, and in reaction to that, the Serbs expel basically a very large amount of the Kosovo Albanian population. 800,000 people flee Kosovo during that time. The majority, or a huge amount, go to Macedonia, and many try and go to Albania. Where were you during that period?
So first of all, 24th of March, 99, NATO bombing starts, and all the international TV crews and all the observers of peace deals that failed until then decide to leave en masse. We had an offer from the BBC. We, the fixers, the producers, translators who work with the BBC, we felt like we would betray Kosovo if we'd leave. So we decided to stay. What that meant, we didn't quite understand at the time, but Serbian police already had our details that we had worked for internationals. And immediately after that, they started going to homes of people who worked with international crews, because they saw that international media helped to bring NATO bombing. And they started ransacking our homes. We made sure we were not there. So we moved, me and my family moved from our flat where we lived here, because my brother also had worked for KDOM, which was the American observers mission at the time that was observing the peace treaties that Milosevic was claiming. He was not gonna use violence on Albanians, so you had missions here. My brother worked for them. I worked for the BBC. We didn't stay with our hands crossed, waiting for the Serbian police. We moved from one flat to another with our relatives, and eventually it became unattainable to live here, as we saw, because everybody was being chased out. The police was then going first with people who worked with international. Then they started just emptying entire neighborhoods of Pristina. And we decided to leave in the sense that after in each neighborhood we'd gone to, we saw ethnic cleansing happening. We decided to leave for Albania. And after 5 days waiting at the border, we managed to get across to Albania, where we had family. And it's very interesting. We left in in a convoy of 4 families. My granddad was someone who had come after the Second World War as a teacher from Albania to educate 90% of illiterate people in Kosovo, partisans. He opened schools for partisans, night schools for partisans who didn't know how to read and write. And he had, in the meantime, luckily that he ended up here because the borders closed. People like him were executed by Enver Hoxha because he went to an American high school when he finished his teacher's college. It was an American-funded Red Cross college, and everybody who'd gone to an American high school had been assassinated later. My granddad ended up in this side of the, let's say, border in Kosovo, teaching Kosovo Albanians, writing the first ABC book. Now, 1950s, the border gets closed. Until 1990s, that border, he's being now kicked out on the other side of the border in Albania, and not being able to enter Kosovo. So this man had seen history in 2 ends, running away from being executed.
The thing I want to emphasize is that every Kosovo Albanian I know has a story. And you talk about people being chased out of Pristina. We both know Andrew Testa, who's married to Laura Kaitazi. Her father was a policeman with Tito. He was actually one of Tito's bodyguards at one stage. And they found him in their house in Pristina, and it was a Serbian paramilitary unit, and they were taking him down to the cellar and they were about to execute him, and someone recognized him as being a former policeman of Tito, and that was enough not to get him executed. It's just a small slice. Everyone has his stories. I remember being on the other side of the border in Macedonia and watching thousands and thousands of people come through, people coming across both through the border itself, where their papers were being taken off them, their Kosovo, their Yugoslav ID, as it was then, being stripped off, and so they were documentless as they went across the border. The point is, for a population of about 1.8 to 2 million, you had 800,000 people leave, and those that were left behind had went through very traumatic weeks and months. I'm rushing through all of this because I'm trying to get up to the present day, but I do want to go through this. The UN intervenes in June 1999. NATO troops, 44,000 NATO troops, move into Kosovo. But despite the UN presence, well, I suppose obviously it's an incredibly chaotic period, that Gulf. Where were you in that time there? Did you come straight back in? How did you come back into Kosovo?
I was among the first who came back. As soon as I got a chance with the NATO troops, I came in via Prizren, went home to Pristina to find a completely rundown apartment. Things were stolen, but and people were coming in from the villages where their homes were burned down. Nevertheless, our flat was just ransacked by police. Other people's homes, as you say, 1 million people were made refugees. They were either hiding in the mountains or expelled from the country. So people were without homes. What I saw is that homes that were empty were being taken on by people whose homes were burned at the same time. I came in to make sure that whoever was going to knock in our flat knows there are people who are coming back here, and this flat is not up for grabs. And soon after that, told my parents that it's now safe to come back. They were staying in Albania with our 100 relatives, which we discovered we had in Albania because my granddad came from there, but we had not known these people because for 50 years the borders were closed because of Enver Hoxha regime. So now they were staying for 3 months with those relatives. They came back. It was a massive return. 500,000 people returned in that June. I guess you can call it the fastest ever ethnic cleansing, but as well the fastest ever return of people back home. People didn't care if there were potentially mines or not complete safety, but nevertheless, they saw NATO come in and they came back in masses to make sure that we're not going to end up forever refugees, 1 million people refugees outside of Kosovo.
I remember flying over Pristina, flying over Kosovo and on a NATO flight. I think it was a British Chinook, and flying over the villages, and not one village was unscathed. All the roofs had been burnt down. And the fascinating thing was, doing the same helicopter ride about a year and a half later, all of those roofs had been rebuilt. Those red tiles had been imported from everywhere, and the money had been, the diaspora had sent huge amounts of money in, and the rebuilding scheme was in marked contrast to Bosnia, where you still to this day you can find, areas, houses, villages that are still abandoned, and Kosovo stood in stark contrast to that. I want to shift onto the politics of it, because the UN stepped in and created an interim administration. You had various UN secretary generals appointing an SRSG, the special representative of the Secretary General, to run the country. And that really, a parliament was set up. Who were the key politicians to emerge from the post-war period? Because I want to talk about them in a second, as what's happened to them.
So first, Ibrahim Rugova was the man who was leading the civil resistance movement, and he was our leader from the 90s, and he became head of LDK, or the Democratic League of Kosovo. That's the first party that Kosovo formed after communism. He was a 1990s politician, so he still existed.
Basically, a pacifist, somebody who took the sort of principled stance against communism, but unarmed, and in contrast to the other former leaders within the KLA.
So he was a critic. He was very much of an intellectual, a critic. He wrote, he studied at Sorbonne. He's known to have a very famous scar all the time around him. And throughout the 1990s, he made also his name by visiting the Pope and having the picture of the Pope behind him. The Pope was, I guess, the first, let's say, big international, let's say, star that ever took attention to Kosovo, and Rugova never forgot that. He wanted to make sure in his narrative why he's important first before everybody else, every other politician in Kosovo. He's important because he was convinced that without international attention and just on its own gung-ho armed rebellion, it wouldn't work. And he insisted that he presents Kosovars not as with how majority of BBC journalists told me that we are, which is that we are Muslims, that we are majority Muslims. This matters a lot about Kosovar identity, because when BBC journalists would come from Bosnia to Kosovo, if they wanted to tell a story about Kosovo, they asked me as a translator, take me in front of some mosque, that I do a piece to camera in front of a mosque to say a little bit about this country. I was quite shocked that that is our identity, meaning that Kosovars don't take religion very seriously. And when someone else tries to impose religion on us, or the identity that we're Muslim, we feel quite offended, because we feel like we're much more than just 90% Muslim. And I think precisely what Rugova did, he wanted to tell the world that it's not because of Muslims that you must intervene here. It's because we're human, and this is a humanitarian catastrophe that is going to happen.
Okay.
In Europe, larger than
whilst we're doing this, I've got to go over to there, that shelf there, and there's a rock on it that I have to grab from it.
Because Rugova would give rocks to everybody.
This is my rock from Ibrahim Rugova. But I saw him beyond his role in the 1990s. I saw him as quite ineffectual as a politician in terms of getting things done. And the major political figures, really, I suppose, apart from him, were Ramush Haradinaj, who created his own political party after the war, who was a big war leader, and then Hashim Thaçi. Yes. And because we're now half past the hour and we've got to race through this, both of those men have faced war crimes. Yeah. How is that? Why is that, Jeta? How has that come about?
Fast forward, the other end of this pacifist are these young Turks, let's say, how we would call them historically, the people who rebelled against this pacifist method because it was inefficient. What they said was basically nobody cares about Kosovo, whether we are Muslim or not. People will only care about you if you stand up for yourself. So they came out with a very a big opposition to Ibrahim Rugova. They were guerrillas, and they were leading guerrillas in their own regions. Ramush Haradinaj was the leader of KLA in West Kosovo, and Hashim Thaçi was a political appointee of the KLA in Central Kosovo, Drenica. So they formed their own parties after the war. Hashim Thaçi was leading PDK, or Democratic Party of Kosovo. Ramush Haradinaj is leading AK. And all these three parties, Rugovas, Ramush's, and Hashim's, all three were at different times in coalition or against, in opposition, leading.
And for me, in a way, that suggests how successful the creation of a democratic Kosovo was, at least in Albanian terms, at least the competition in Albanian terms. But having said that, I would say corruption was a major thing. And I know the contracts with the Thaçi family. I have copies of a contract which they were paying off people for mining aggregate. I mean, the amount of money going into people's pockets was substantial. Yet they weren't put in the dock for those crimes. They've been put into the dock now in the Hague and Thaçi's case, as well as other leading members of the KLA, for what happened immediately after the war. So say what happened then.
So immediately after the war, with the return of so many people to grab, I also spoke of grabbing of flats coming back from the villages to towns. The guerrillas felt that it is in their right to finally get back, let's say, property ownership that they were kept away from, or they had burned down. So they felt a moral right, and majority of
basically winner takes all is what you're saying.
Yes, this was grabbing whatever power, grabbing power, but grabbing wealth. As well as doing it through forming political parties. So,
but at the same time, there were, in that immediate period after the war, and also during the conflict, there were people who were detained, people who who they thought accused of being serving spies.
So there was a big clash of distrust of guerrillas against the civic, let's say, the civil resistance or peaceful resistance. The guerrillas were, even during the war and after, started using violence to eliminate political opponents. They felt that it's their time now. So often they were ordering political murders of people who were with Rugova. So it's very famous now. Hashim Thaçi, together with 5 other KLA leaders, are in The Hague because of these very leftist and silly communiques they had issued as death warrants against people who were in the civil activist, the peaceful movement. Yes. So there was internal distrust, but let's not forget, as a translator, I also experienced distrust of the peaceful resistance movement against the guerrillas. The peaceful resistance politician would tell me, be careful where you're going with these journalists. And the people you are meeting, they may look like guerrillas, but they're agents of Serbia. So they did not necessarily commit crimes to kill opponents, but they certainly started saying that people who are taking up guns against Milosevic are paid by Milosevic himself to incite violence in order to justify the killing of many people. So there was an internal realistic paranoia, and in this paranoia, many people were killed after the war, killed in a chaos of unlawfulness, where you went after your political opponents who were Albanians, not necessarily Serbs. But let's not forget, also Albanians went after Serbs, went after Romas in a revenge attacks. It was pure revenge attacks. And what I saw on those 3 months working for the BBC, I was covering the human rights violations that clearly non-Albanians were being resorted to. Their house is being burned down because people were coming back, finding 10,000 people were missing after Kosovo, and people had no patience to wait for the law to
revenge.
Revenge. They simply revenged, burned homes, expelled many Serbs, blaming them from what what Serbian army did.
Okay, I'd love to get questions. We've gone through this stretch of history because I think it informs so much of what's happening today. The shocking thing for me is that it's now 2023, and the same issues that I was covering as a correspondent, first the BBC back in 2003, and then the New York Times thereafter, have not gone away. Serbia does not recognize Kosovo. You have last Friday, Serbian troops deployed to the boundary or the border with Kosovo, and heavily armed police going into northern Kosovo, which is Serb dominated, and these are ethnic Albanian police, to go and basically set up local administrations run by Albanians. It's how is the bigger question is, why has there not been a long-term solution? And so we have, since 2008, Kosovo has been independent. Serbia has refused to recognize it all this time. Why is there suddenly this interest from the EU to try and resolve the problem now? Because that's the background to what's been happening this last weekend.
The question is, why is there an interest to resolve by the EU? Why hasn't it been resolved till now is more of a question. And it cannot, Nick, be resolved when you have actually you have the same people who used to be part of Milosevic cabinet. Mr. Vučić, Aleksandar Vučić, who now is the president of Serbia, used to be Minister of Information when I was ethnically cleansed, meaning that I used to see Vučić justifying to the world as Minister of Information why 1 million of Albanians are being expelled from their homes. So now, in my memory, I'm still the Albanian he tried to ethnically cleanse. I see him talking about Kosovo and how he the rights that Serbia believes it has over Kosovo. It's not 20 years. It's the narrative that Serbia has over Kosovo goes from medieval times. It starts from medieval times, believing that this is the Kosovo is some sort of saint land of Serbia, and that the justification of existing Serbian churches means that that this is Serbian land. So Vučić, I'm sorry to make this analogy, but for me it seems like, could you have ever overcome Second World War in the Western Europe if Goebbels, the Ministry of Information of Hitler, was 23 years after the Second World War, he would remain an active politician in Germany? Would Europe, France, and the rest of Europe and UK ever accept it? A Germany that hasn't come to its own terms over what it did. So for former Yugoslavia, Serbia is seen as the one that had started a war with Croatia, with Slovenia, with Bosnia, then with Kosovo. That Serbia to this day believes it was right. There is no dealing with the past process having gone on there. It still believes that for example, last time Vučić had a speech in Kosovo, he said Milosevic's policy was right. It was just unsuccessful. The problem is that he was unsuccessful. So the mentality of Serbia towards Kosovo is similar to mentality that Russia has to Ukraine. It believes, it is offended by the fact that Kosovo is independent. It is offended, deeply offended, and it considers that it's just a matter of time when it can go on, when opportunity presents itself to invade it, retake it. So that's the kind of mentality.
So what was the EU trying to agree or sort out? There's something called the Ohrid Agreement, which ostensibly was agreed between Vučić and Albin Kurti. We haven't spoken about Albin Kurti at all. We will do in a second. What was the EU? Why is the EU trying to come up with a solution now? I mean, I think if we look at the broader region, everything else, Slovenia joined the EU 2004, I think. Croatia, much more recently. If you look at Bulgaria, Romania, obviously not part of former Yugoslavia, but if you look at the rest of the Balkans, EU integration going well ahead, but the Western Balkans, former Yugoslavia, certainly not. So why now? Why is there this concern now, and what was the aim of that agreement?
So this process that has been restarted now with the Ohrid agreement is basically a recycling of a process that started 10 years ago, a dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia that EU has mediated for last maybe now 15 years. And with all this dialogue, EU aims to reach what it has called a normalization agreement. So it believes that Serbia will never recognize Kosovo. It wants to create some sort of civil understanding where you live and let live. And the last agreement agreed in February this year is similar to the two Germany's agreements that they had after the Second World War. Where Serbia would recognize Kosovo's symbols, flags, and not contest its statehood, while Serbia would, in exchange, secure what two big things it wants, which is the formation of the Association of Serbian Municipalities, which is an independence to how it runs, especially the north of Kosovo, which Kosovo finds very offensive because it's a new level of governance that would imply something like Kosovo is scared that this becomes a future Republika Srpska.
Okay, so that just to recap, and I suppose the overall aim is to get Kosovo and Serbia to recognize each other, which are not going to. Well, Kosovo recognizes Serbia, but they don't have diplomatic relations, and Serbia refuses to recognize Kosovo as an independent state. And Serbia is blocking Kosovo's membership of UN various international bodies, and the aim would be to eventually overcome that. The majority of the population, the Serbian population, or the most concentrated Serbian population, is in the north of Kosovo, but there are quite a big Serbian population across the middle of Kosovo too, and also near the border with Albania. And those are the municipalities that we're talking about. So that association of municipalities would link them all together. How would it give them extra powers, Jeta?
It would, if it is. If the statute of this association is according to what Serbia wants, it would give them power to choose their own head of police, to deal with security matters, with health and education, have power in, have its own, say, Ministry of Economy, Ministry of, supposedly have a new sense. It would be a regionalization of Kosovo. Kosovo is tiny. In 2 hours, you drive to a border. If what happened when Kosovo became independent, it happened under condition that it would secure the rights of Serbs. Under those conditions, new municipalities were formed, new towns were formed with majority Serbs in order to make them feel secure. So Kosovars feel like we've done all the concessions we ought to have done according to Ahtisaari package. Ahtisaari was the diplomat that made that package to announce Kosovo's independence. Serbia never accepted that. It was never enough to have more Serbian majority municipalities. It wants more powers in what Kosovo feels to disrupt and undermine Kosovo's statehood and work in completely different systems. Kosovo saw the example of what's happening with Republika Srpska in Bosnia, where Republika Srpska blocks a lot of decisions in the parliament in Bosnia, and it doesn't want a repeat of that in Kosovo. Okay. If it was up to Kosovo, association would be formed with very little powers, no extra executive, what they called executive powers. Serbia wants an association only with executive powers.
I don't understand that last bit. I don't, looking at the agreement, I don't see what the executive powers are. What are the additional powers that you're worried about how it could be developed. I don't see any additional powers mentioned in that document.
I know, but the devil lies in the detail of its statute. The statute has not been made, has not been approved, and it's all about how differently both communities see this body. Serbia wants it to be a body that decides everything for itself. Like,
and so your fear is, what's the comparison? What's the comparison with Republika Srpska in Bosnia? Why is that a fear?
Because Republika Srpska has its own police, has its own economy, police, and borders, and that's what Kosovo doesn't want. For these municipalities to link up in their own police, security, and economy separate from the Kosovo system.
Okay. Listen, I'd love to get questions from people. We've got one question from Lynn Maddock, which is more about the Kosovo Albanians and Serbs. But go ahead with your question, and we'll move on from there. Go on, Lynn. You there, Lynn? Might be quite late in Sydney, Australia. So Lynn, your question, if you're unable to come to it, so you.
I can read it, Nick. It's a very interesting question, and there had been some intermarriages between ethnic.
Well, let's make the distinction between Bosnia, where everyone speaks the same language, which is Bosnian or Serbian, but it's essentially the same language. But ethnically and in terms of linguistically, that Serbs and Albanians are very, very different people, and the Albanian language is a completely different language. It's a different language family.
So that's why this question is relevant to the Slavic groups, where there was a lot of interethnic marriages. There were not so many interethnic marriages between Albanians and Serbs in Kosovo. Not so many. Milosevic Serbian nationalism found a lot of fertile ground because of the, let's say, church narrative, the religious narrative, the Slavic versus the Slavic Christian fighting people against the Muslim backward fighting Albanians. So that narrative continued through the former Yugoslavia, and it was never really, the seeds of it were always there.
And in terms of numbers, the number of Serbs, obviously many Serbs fled after the war because they were being persecuted and attacked. But the numbers of actually Serbs living within central Kosovo is very small, isn't it? I mean, it's maybe in the tens of thousands.
Yes, the number of Serbs living is very small, but nevertheless, these communities live, Albanian and Serbian communities live in their own bubble. In cities they live, there are the majority, and they intermarry with each other, and it's never the same with Albanians. Today, there's so little, there's so little in common, actually, that younger people don't speak Serbian anymore, like I do. I belong to the last generation. Let's say I'm 45. I'm probably one of the last generation of people who would speak Serbian, because we learned it at school. In my office, I run an NGO with 70 people, all younger journalists who come in, out of whom only 3 of us speak Serbian. Serbs never learn Albanian, and never learned or don't today. Majority of Serbs don't know Albanian. So today, not only that if they intermarry, they need to speak English to each other if they get close to each other. Hardly anybody speaks each other's language.
I want to come back to that question. You're talking about this sense as though if the Second World War had ended and Goebbels was still left as a politician within Germany, that you have the hangover of Milosevic's regime still there in Serbia. How do people feel on the one hand looking at that, and then they see Thaci, who tried to strike a deal with the Serbs. In actual fact, he tried to swap territory with Serbia. And so he was ready to he was looking for recognition. Here was the guy, former leader of the KLA, ready to do a deal with Milosevic, his former information minister, and seek peace. He then loses office. He's no longer in power anymore. And he's now in The Hague.
People felt appalled with that whole campaign. To speak honestly, I couldn't believe my eyes. I was in, let's say, quite in disbelief. I couldn't sleep at night with the idea that there is a Kosovan Albanian politician who would sign the division of our country, who would give territory away with our own hand. That was the dream of Milosevic, to ethnically cleanse Kosovo, to give away territory, and to send us back to Albania. That was the idea.
So you couldn't believe that he'd do that deal, but that's one part of the question. But the other part is now it's Thaci who's on trial for war crimes. Okay, Milosevic went to The Hague. He died before that his trial could be concluded. But I presume that there are many former Serbian police commanders, people who are involved in Milosevic's regime, who we know have not gone on trial.
Yes, and people feel again appalled with the idea that no matter how corrupt Thaci's governments have been, it did not deserve to be in The Hague compared to for war crimes, compared to the amount of war crimes that the Serbs have done in Kosovo. Let's just remind ourselves: 10,000 people are missing in Kosovo, out of which 9,000 are Kosovo Albanians, 1,000 are non-Albanians, and no big figure has gone on war crimes. Milosevic died. There haven't been enough trials against Serbian police officers, Serbian leaders of paramilitary groups who have been testified. Their own soldiers have testified that they ran these massacres here. Today in Belgrade they hold public posts. These are people who are cherished in Belgrade. They continue to live on, to have businesses, companies, and while Kosovar Albanians, who were largely expelled in '99, and there was a major ethnic cleansing campaign, have 5 top leaders in The Hague. I mean, this is quite bizarre that we have an international court that we established that particularly says it will try Albanians, not Serbs. It particularly said it will not try Serb war criminal suspects.
And this actually was an agreement put through Kosovo's parliament. So it is something set up by the Kosovan parliament at the behest of the European Union, which basically made it a condition of advancing towards further integration.
And the US, let's make that point.
At the time.
Yeah.
So the one figure I wanted to talk about was Albin Kurti. So Albin Kurti is the prime minister. He's the person who is essentially, he agreed to this awkward framework, but he's become under heavy criticism for what's happened since. What has happened since?
So Albin Kurti was a leader of the student protests when I started to work as a journalist, and he was the last to, when Kosovo was free during a NATO bombing and after, he was taken to jail in Serbia. So he didn't see the NATO, let's say, entering Kosovo. He was still in jail as an activist, and he became, for a short time, he was also spokesperson at the time of Kosovo Liberation Army. For a long time, he was the biggest critic of international missions in Kosovo, who put pressure, as we both spoke, you and me, Nick, who constantly put pressure on Kosovo to make concessions, including the formation of International Criminal Court. He was against the formation of this court. He was against the forming of Serbian municipalities with majority municipalities, because he saw it as too many concessions that will that weaken Kosovo's statehood. And after probably 15 to 20 years of opposition leadership, he became prime minister. He suddenly won, not suddenly, but he fought hard to get the majority, and he did. This is a big change in Kosovo.
Basically created a very successful political movement, both initially in opposition to the UN and the UN's failure to hand over power, but then secondly in opposition to those key parties, the PDK led by Thaci, and then the LDK, the party belonging to Rugova. And very much an outsider. He took in, when his demonstrators were attacked with tear gas by police, he came into parliament and took one of those tear gas canisters and let it off in parliament. So he's a bit of a radical.
Yes, he was seen as a bit of a radical, but as it is shown, a radical can get quite reformed once he becomes prime minister, in a sense that many people believed he would not sign an agreement which gives more power to Serbian population here, more power than it already had. When he actually went to audit, and he accepted that whatever agreements that were signed before by previous leaders, he is going to respect, which is the 2013 and 2015 agreement that allows for the making of the Association of Serbian Municipalities. Apart from that, he also signed another concession, which many people believed, according to what he had opposed so far, he would not give more power to the Serbian church, while the Serbian Orthodox Church has one clause that it will have its right and territory according to the new agreement. So these are two concessions which if he was in opposition, he would throw tear gas at the parliament to stop. But he's not an opposition. He's now a leader.
So what happened last weekend? Because those municipalities, they had elections, didn't they?
Yeah,
and those elections were meant to be setting up those institutions that had been agreed by those Vucic and Kurti. Elections took place. What happened?
So I spoke about his concessions, but on the other hand, he's been trying to impose Kosovo institutions in the north in a few symbolic things which previous leaders had not managed to. And this is why this is happening. It all started with the fact that he was imposing Kosovo car plates for all the cars that drive in Kosovo. They need to be registered with Kosovo car plates. In the entire Kosovo, including Serbs who live in central Kosovo, they have accepted to have car plates that are Kosovo car plates, while only in the north of Kosovo, the car plates that exist are car plates of the 1990s of the towns in former Yugoslav time. These were becoming illegal, dormant, and in October last year, the government made a decision that these plates of former Yugoslavia, these plates that are issued in Serbia proper, are illegal from now on. And when he asked the local police to start issuing tickets to everybody who has illegal car plates, the local police said, I would rather remove this uniform and resign than issue tickets. It all started, the whole thing started because of this. So the local police resigned, then the local judges resigned, then the local prosecutors resigned, and then all Serb, clearly. And eventually, the Serbian mayors of those municipalities resigned. This started a process where you needed to announce a new election. And new elections were announced that these mayors had to be replaced. And barricades started, trenches started to form. A resistance of violent protesters started in November last year as a response to this Kosovo's response that you have to have new elections. So the first that was attacked was the Central Election Commission, was attacked, was ransacked. There were barricades for 1 month, and eventually these barricades came down by Christmas last year. in which some sort of ceasefire was agreed, where a police officer that was arrested because of the attack on the Central Election Commission was released, and now the troubles have restarted because these elected mayors, who are all Albanian, because Serbs boycotted the
turnout, and then the Albanians effectively took part. Well, very few Serbs did.
Very few, 3% of the population took part. All Albanians and all that minority of Albanians chose Albanian mayors. Albanian mayors had to take on office on Friday last week, and when they went to work, they found blocked offices and crowds of people who consider them illegitimate mayors. Okay,
and it's worth saying that the atmosphere in North Mitrovica is much more hard line, and I mean, it has a very long history of violent protest. And when things kick off, if things kick off in Mitrovica, sometimes they can spread elsewhere.
It's true, and that is things have spread. What we haven't said yet is that that hard line has been encouraged by Wagner groups existing and having their own branches in Serbia and in the north. And you can see the Z symbol in the north very often. People have been encouraged by Russia's invasion in Ukraine. And that situation has somehow triggered down to initiating new sentiments for violence in Kosovo.
But would you say that it's been worth it? If this was all about license plates to start with, it hasn't gone very well.
No, it probably hasn't been worth it. But then this government is so new, it wouldn't have had it any other way but to try it themselves. When Hashim Thaçi did it, or Ramush Haradinaj did it, they said, well, you guys are the problem. You don't know how to handle the North. When we come in power, we will show you how we instill the sovereignty of Kosovo in the North, where exactly they're getting more humble day by day as it goes by, because we see even Vetvendosia, the radical Vetvendosia, the nationalist, patriotic Ankara Vetvendosia, is not being able to resolve the situation in the North.
We're gonna have to wrap up shortly. If anyone's got questions, please, we've got to get them in now, because Jeta's got to go very shortly. But if you're coming on the tour, you're going to see Jeta next Monday. So you can perhaps ask them, but if you've got questions, do ask them now. Bizarrely, because of this failure to find an agreement, I find myself, or we find ourselves, in the same position that I was in 20 years ago, which is I cannot cross the border from Madare, from Pristina, and drive straight up to Belgrade. I have to go all the way through Macedonia and add about another 300 kilometers to my journey, because my entry stamp will not be recognized by Serbian authorities crossing from Kosovo into Pristina. Dylan Thwaites is there, the question, so let's get this one there. Go ahead, Dylan. Text question only, he says here, isn't what Mike's not, that's me being slow. He says, did you say what Wagner groups are currently in Kosovo? I think you said that there's certainly a pro-Russian presence in North Mitrovica in terms of the graffiti and the sort of tenure of the debate, but are there actually Wagner mercenaries in Kosovo? Jeta.
Just a moment, samo malo. Aco, čekaj me 5 minuta. 5 minuta, molim te. Izovem te.
And there's a proof that Jeta speaks fluent, so okay.
Yes, the situation in the North is happening right now. There's protest, and one of my guests in the panel is coming tonight from the North, and that is whom I had to quickly answer to. So is there Wagner groups in Kosovo? They have connections to Wagner groups in Russia. When we say Wagner group is it's like let's say like a sect, a little bit like a sect. If you want to become part of them, I think they have some sort of, you can put their t-shirts, and you can.
It's a brand. It's a brand like ISIS.
So you have people with Wagner t-shirts and balaclavas. In these last 6 months, they have come up and posed post pictures online and with saying that we are not going to leave Kosovo. Kosovo is our land. We are here to stay, meaning that Wagner is behind us. So to that level, yes, there is a brand. There's certainly a brand.
Right, we're going to wrap it up there. Yeah, so thank you so much for your time. Hvala vam puno, hvala lijepa. Faleminderit shumë.
Faleminderit juve. I can't wait to see you here. Look forward to having you in person here.
Yeah, brilliant. Faleminderit. Mirupafshim. Thank you very much. See you soon.